moment. All right. I want to remind you of a couple more things that we have been doing throughout the evening. There is going to be a happy hour at the end of the evening. There's a raffle for that, and there are people putting their names in the pseudo fishbowl outside for that. So if you want to be part of that raffle, please go ahead and participate. And then we'll go ahead and ask for names again tomorrow morning for the one that we'll be having there. We're giving away some stuff from No Starch Press as well as Fitbit. Question? He had a question, but did not want to answer it. I want to turn over the next speaker, just reminding everyone to please thank our sponsors. If you do so here in person, or if you do so online, or if even if you just happen to bump into someone while you're here, we really appreciate that. They help put on and cover the cost of all the things like food and the like. If you have any feedback, BSidesSF.com/feedback. Please share that information. Every year, we hear people go, oh, so-and-so said something about the event. I'm like, then they should submit it. So please go ahead and do that. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the next speaker. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. So, who here uses a computer? Who has it turned on and makes daily use of it? You all stink at information security. Those are the first 3 laws of computer security, initially termed by Robert Morris. Who here knows who Robert Morris is? All right. Not the guy with the worm, his father. Anyway, who here is Robert Morris? You never know, right? Anyway, my name is Jan, and I'm from the internet, and I'm here to help. You guys ever been on the internet? They got some crazy stuff there on that internet. Like Twitter, for example. Who here is on Twitter? Yeah, you're not helping. You're not helping. Neither am I. You can follow me on Twitter, vote Quimby. So I went on Twitter the other day, and it turns out that most people express opinions that are not those of their employers. I'm like, what the fuck? RTs are not endorsements? Crazy. Anyway, so instead of rage quitting Twitter, I figured I'd take a page of their notes and say, you know what? This talk is not endorsed by my employer whatsoever. They don't even know what I'm talking about, so don't blame them. But they paid for me to come here, which is really nice, so thank you, Yahoo, and we're hiring. Vote Quimby. Anyway, so I came all this long way from New York to tell you something you all already know. You're working in information security, and you know that everything is awful. It's terrible. So I'm surprised they invite me here, because everybody knows this already, right? Here's the things that are awful. So if you search around on GitHub, you know, your regular Git dorking, you see chmod 777, which is really awful. You go on, and you can search for SQL injection, and that is really, really awful too, right? So there's lots of things that are terrible on the internet, and we in InfoSec, we are well aware of this, and we keep talking about this and ridiculing people for this. We say that developers clearly do not know what they're doing. And this is our position, and I think that's not really helping. Other things that are awful. The internet of unpatchable shit. We have toys with cameras on them that, you know, spy on children or some such. And of course, if you perform some sort of research on how many of these might be vulnerable, then yes, you find that almost every single one of them has a backdoor. And all these wonderful devices that we put out there are really, really easy to compromise. That's awful. The internet of unpatchable shit is terrible. Things that are really, really old by now, this is from over 3 years ago, still gets a lot of kicks in the InfoSec community, particularly because of the headlines like this. And of course, the particular application of this vulnerability is something that is really not a whole lot of fun. But, you know, ridiculing the internet of shit is something that is really, really easy. And we do it a lot, right? We have a lot of fun doing this, and we laugh at it. It's kind of like shooting fish in a barrel. Or like, you know, sifting through Shodan and seeing what kind of vulnerable things are out there on the internet. What do we have over here? We've got some sort of subway payment system another toilet, cognac distillery, and some ski lift, apparently. Yes, InfoSec research at its finest. We're just browsing Shodan and we're calling it, furthering the state of security. And I think this is where we have to take a little bit of responsibility and accept that we're not helping by just doing these things. It's really, really easy to laugh about these things and really, really easy to point fingers and say developers don't know what they're doing and users don't know what they want and look at all these, things that are open up there, but we actually should be focusing a little bit more on trying to help in this regard. All right, on. So one of the side effects that occurs is that I think every industry gets the conferences they deserve, and the conferences are a reflection of how the industry behaves. And we apparently have reached a point where people who are paid for a living to play pretend get to tell us how to do our job. That's a little bit awful. This is also a reflection of a certain mindset where some people think that they can do somebody else's job. And this is the lesson that I think Sean Penn has to learn, just like I think we have to learn it too. Being really good at this one thing does not mean you're really good at this other thing. Being a really good actor does not make you a really good investigative journalist or somebody who understands the implication of operational security. But on the flip side, being really good at those things does not mean that you're a really good developer. It does not mean that you are really good at building infrastructure, and does not mean that you're really good at running internet services and all these other things. And so I think that we have to become really aware of this, because we oftentimes present ourselves as ridiculing other people and laughing about their incapabilities because we understand how all this stuff works, right? We are on the end, we know how the internet works, and we know how to break it. And one of the reasons that I think we're not helping is that we do not live in the real world. We do not live in the same world like the people that we try to protect or the people that we try to help. Information security in general is not the same as the real world. We live in a world where Hanlon's razor is really, really dull, where the assumption of maliciousness is much more likely than stupidity. In the real world, it's the reverse. Of course, Snowden didn't help the whole thing a lot. All the tinfoil hats that were spewing all sorts of theories a couple of years ago, and we laughed at them, and nowadays we're like, oh yeah, that actually happened. So yeah, thanks Obama. Snowden. But there are other people who live in the real world, and they live in a different world than we do. Amongst them are journalists trying to protect sources, and in 2016, as well as in 2013 at this case, still do not know how to protect their sources appropriately and have to be taught slowly and very painfully so. There are people who live in the real world who are doctors and nurses and hospital administrators who all of a sudden have to figure out how to use Bitcoin to pay somebody ransom for their data. And that is a real world for them. The real world includes people who are store clerks, who have to verify signatures on credit card receipts. I don't know if you can read this, but some InfoSec person wrote butthole as their signature. You can do all sorts of things in these regards. But we know that this is funny, but the people in the real world actually probably do not think so. Parents live in the real world. Parents who hear stories about cyber attacks, cyber bullying, cyber pornography, and all things other cyber, and who are just trying to do their best. And you know where this is going, right? You know that, you've got a parenting app that actually spies on children, then of course that leads to a data exposure, and those people are all at risk. That's also awful. Lawyers live in the real world. Lawyers who are trying to communicate with their clients and that cannot be guaranteed any confidentiality. And we come and we tell them, oh wait, you should use PGP. there's no way they're doing this. There's no encrypted phone calls. There's not even an expectation of privacy. And the data that they are logging here is then, of course, exposed very quickly. Other people who live in the real world include librarians. Librarians who are trying to expunge the records of the books that are being lent, that are being requested, and that are teaching classes to try to help other people understand how to maneuver the internet and how to use the computers. They're doing so using computers that are 20 years old, and they're still doing an amazing job at it. Not all things are awful. This was the case where librarians were finally allowed to run Tor relays and Tor exit nodes in the library because librarians actually understand many of these problems. They do live in the real world. And seriously, librarians are awesome. Librarians are awesome. Librarians really understand the implications of privacy and freedom of expression and all those things. And you really should stick with them. So don't fuck with librarians. Those are people who live in the real world. And that is not our world. Those are all the people who live in the real world who have a different world than the ones that we do. And we should try to figure out how to help them. And normally, whenever we see these problems, what do? Well, we recommend you rub some crypto on it, because that always works. Crypto never fails. But we should probably step back and think whether or not this is the right solution for the regular people who live in a different world than we do. So yeah, everything is awful and we're not helping. I said earlier, or I had on my slide anyway, that I call this an optimistic talk. Because yes, everything is awful and we're not helping, but maybe we can figure out a way out of this. Maybe we can take a look at what all these cases where things are awful have in common. And if you look at those, you get a couple of stories that keep repeating. Who knows who this is? Anybody? Yes, this is the S in RSA, correct? Adi Shamir. Who here knows who Adi Shamir is? If you don't, how did you get in here? God damn it. Anyway, fun fact, did you know the S in RSA does not stand for show and pen? Anyway. Who here is Adi Shamir? All right, got to cover my bases, never know. So Adi Shamir, when he accepted his Turing Award, gave a speech and he coined 3 laws. One of them is that absolute secure systems do not exist. The second law is that to halve your vulnerability, you have to double your expenditure. And cryptography is typically bypassed, not penetrated. So he gave this speech and this award in 2002, and 14 years later, I don't think we have completely internalized these lessons, and it would behoove us to do so. Absolutely secure systems do not exist. This is something that we have to learn and accept, and just really deal with it. And it's a problem for people who work in cryptography, for example, because if you fail a little bit in crypto, yeah, you fail all the way. That's just the way it is. But not all problems are crypto problems, even though they are security problems. So we have to sometimes accept that we have to make trade-offs and that we have to deal with certain imperfections. So absolutely secure systems do not exist, but that's fine. Oftentimes it is entirely sufficient to just raise the cost of an attack above a certain level so that your attackers can no longer exploit it. For that, of course, you have to know your threat model. I said that raising the cost of an attack is entirely sufficient in most cases if you understand who your attackers are and what their capabilities are. So you have to actually understand your threat model in this regard. You're welcome. Who here knows who this is? Anybody? See, that's another problem. We know all the security people, we don't know other people. This is Fred Brooks, famous computer scientist. You may know him from his work as in the Mythical Man months, and in particular the essay No Silver Bullet. It's particularly important and useful in the software development community, and it would behoove us to actually understand those two. Anyway, so he had in his essay the idea of having certain types of complexity in software. Namely that you have essential complexity and accidental complexity. Essential complexity is complexity you can't remove from the problem. Accidental complexity is all the stuff that you add around it accidentally, and that really makes things more complex, but you could do without it. Here's an example. If you have a web service, and I hear that's a thing, and you put it on the internet, and you want to do this over HTTPS, there are certain things you cannot avoid. You will expose this on port 443, you will use TLS, and it will speak HTTP. This is the essential complexity of this problem. But at the same time, you do not have to have 1 million ciphers enabled. You do not have to have all sorts of different limitations, different libraries that you're using. And the slide is cut off there. You don't have to have all sorts of different applications serving HTTP content either. That is accidental complexity, and we should strive to reduce accidental complexity to simplify the world. Because it turns out, not only is this better from a software engineering perspective, it also is better from security perspective. Because reducing complexity drastically reduces your attack surface. And if you reduce your attack surface, then you are winning. You should have some data. Data is your friend. We have over here a chart that just shows, a little bit scaled down, the distribution of some of the SSL ciphers used on the web stack over time as we're dialing them down. If you track them, you see one going down, and as this one goes down, the other one goes up. So if you have a preferred cipher list, and you shuffle it around a bit, you can figure out which one is all of a sudden already dropping off. Once you realize which one's dropping off, you can turn it off completely. And once you do that, you can move on to actually serving very well TLS. And you have reduced the complexity on the attack surface of the problem. And getting this out to your entire stack also then reduces your attack surface. So data is your friend. If, for example, you take numbers from your bug bounty program and you look at the frequency of issues that are reported, then you have a whole chunk of data and you can say, hey, which one is the most important for me to address? But you have to be careful with your data. You have to understand what story the data is telling you. This is just frequency. So based on frequency, you would say, hey, we should focus on SQL injections and XSS, and then we have, knocked out almost 3/4. But at the same time, the different vulnerabilities may have different value, and you're probably paying different values for them. So you can actually do another graph. You can just say, hey, what's the average payout by a given type of vulnerability? And then you can see which one you should focus on. This is a Pareto chart, which I'm particularly fond of to try to help you make these decisions. I left out the actual numbers so that you don't come to me and say, hey, you didn't pay me enough for my self-XSS. And it's going to cost you. If you want to reduce your attack surface, if you want to reduce your vulnerability, you have to pay. So you can actually also see how much it's going to cost you to win how much if you use the data. So data is your friend. Let's take a look at this. All those things that were awful earlier, we said, okay, where are they? We have SQLi, XSS, RCE, redirects, all these things. What we're missing here is APT breaking our cryptos. That is nowhere in there. This is not the low-hanging fruit that we're seeking. Cryptography is typically bypassed, not penetrated. You will not see these kinds of things show up in your bug bounty because they're bypassed, not broken. Cryptography is typically bypassed, sometimes legally so. A 6-digit PIN seems to be sufficient to foil a fairly capable adversary. Here's a graph of how the US does risk management. We have cause of death on the left in the blue column, and government spending in the green one. The column that goes all the way off the chart is terrorism. This is risk management in the US. That is awful. But we are doing something similar. We are pretending that APT, people breaking our cryptos, is this really super important thing, and we spend all our focus on it. When on the same side, we have people just doing script kiddies, doing SQLIs, and people pushing their keys to GitHub, etc. And maybe we should readjust our focus here. So APT is super exciting because we can think, hey, we can do all these wonderful things. We want to fight against all the evil governments and all the mafias and all those things. But in fact, what we're really seeing as a persistent threat is the I love you virus from 2000, basically. Still phishing, still works, is the way into the system. Maybe we should focus on that. If you think problems can be solved by cryptography, you're probably wrong. There are very few cases that you can actually solve by applying stronger cryptography. One of the things that does not work is people uploading their credentials to GitHub. That's the thing. Everybody does that. Yes, we have a lot of those. It's really sad. But crypto will not help us here. So yeah, everything is awful and we're not helping. Let's figure out a way around this. First of all, we have to accept that everything is awful. That's fine. We said that. Is the internet on fire? Probably. In fact, we have an OpenSSL advisory coming up on Tuesday. Yes, so the internet is probably on fire. But the internet is always going to be on fire. I put this website up after Heartbleed, and since then, every week or so, some major event happens, and we are panicking, and we're losing our shit, and we're starting to try to patch things, and the next week we repeat it over and over again. We should focus on being calm here and addressing these problems more easily without losing our shit. So don't waste your time on busy work, measure your impact, and prioritize. In order for you to be able to do that, you have to actually understand your threat model, as I said earlier. In order to understand your threat model, you actually have to have a threat model to begin with. So maybe start there. Threat models are awesome. And I know that many people here understand threat modeling in general, and I'm just going to leave this up here for completeness sake. We have a bunch of circles, we have threats you know about, threats you decide to defend against, you can defend against, and some threats that you care about. And you should figure out how to increase the circles appropriately. The blue circle is really important. So is the green one, and the yellow one, and the red one. All those circles are really important. So understand your threat model is what I'm saying. So yeah, measure your impact, prioritize, but help others to take responsibility, because you can't do this all by yourself. You have to help others, you have to teach them, and you have to guide them. And when you do this, try to be understanding. Other people's jobs are not as easy as you think they are. We say, oh, you should just not upload your keys to GitHub. You should just do this. You should just do that. When you say just do, stop talking. You do not understand the whole implications. You're not an expert at all things. You may be an expert at InfoSec. Try to be understanding that other people are experts in their domain. So yeah, do try to prioritize and be helpful. Teach and listen. Listen to the other parties, to the other teams, what they're doing, what they're working on. And stop with the fucking Sun Tzu quotes. Those are not helping at all. All right, thank you.
We're going to give you a speaker gift of a Fitbit. Thank you very much for participating. Really appreciate it. Awesome. We're going to get the next speaker up here, hopefully, very short.